Mike's on Mike is made possible by contributions from listeners like you to the Jacksonville History Center. One city, many stories. Online at jaxhistory.org.
Mike.
Mike's on Mike, a conversation about politics, government, and Jacksonville, with 50-year opinion leaders Mike Hightower, Mike Tolbert, and award-winning broadcaster and longtime political observer, Mike Miller.
Welcome to another episode of Mike's on Mike. I'm Mike Miller, along with Mike Hightower, who's here in studio with me. Mike Tolbert is back at the farm, and we're delighted to have you with us. Of course, Mike's on Mike brought to you by the Jacksonville History Center, where our friend Alan Bliss, his fine staff, and of course our generous donors are what keep the lights on and the cameras rolling, and we thank them so much for their support for this program.
Thank you.
In a Mike's on Mike podcast almost 2 years ago now, our guest was then Downtown Investment Authority CEO Lori Boyer. Now, much of that conversation was about downtown investment and seeming to be cursed by what we call pretty renderings and no shovels going into any dirt. But since then, a lot has changed in the development of downtown. Compared to the years before, it seems like new projects are riding a rocket. And speaking of rockets, today our guest is Bryan Moll, who's the energetic developer who's supplying much of the fuel for this rocket. Bryan is the CEO of Gateway Jax, which is sponsored by JWB Real Estate Capital and DLP Capital. Gateway Jax has over 25 city blocks and more than $2 billion in projects underway or planned. Bryan, great to meet you. Great to have you on the program. Thanks for joining us on Mike's on Mike.
Yeah, that's $2 billion.
That's
with
right.
A B. With a B.
Yeah, it's a pretty ambitious project. But yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Welcome to have you.
Good to have you. Mr. Tolbert, kick it off as usual.
Bryan, again, thank you so much for joining us today. And, you know, I read that your passion for building cities began as a boy with Legos. And Gateway Jax, for a lot of people who don't know this, is not your first rodeo. Before you arrived in Jacksonville, you were responsible for two major urban changing developments. The one first was in Washington, outside Washington, D.C., which is National Landing. And the second, a lot of us know about it, which is Water Street, Tampa. What brought you to Jacksonville, and what made you think you could have some of that same success in this city?
Yeah, you're right about the Legos. I loved, even before Legos, I think I was playing with like Lincoln Logs.
Have you gone to Legoland?
I have. Okay. It's a little overwhelming, to be honest, but it's pretty cool. Yeah, so I've always had a love for the built environment, and I think maybe by some luck, some good friendships and maybe some skill along the way, was able to get involved with a real estate developer that did so basically what we're doing today, which is primarily a development-based real estate investment company that received a lot of its capital from a private equity fund, which is essentially what we're doing in Jacksonville today. So I cut my teeth in Washington, my first time around in Washington, actually, D.C., doing slightly smaller scale projects, definitely not $2 billion worth of real estate at one time. But, 1, 2, 3 buildings that were all clustered together. And at the time in D.C., this is, well over 20 years ago now, the idea of kind of that large-scale transformative project in areas where that didn't exist, that was all still relatively new in the world of real estate development. In cities, of course, that was, you were seeing a lot of that in the suburbs with shopping malls and, and big apartment complexes. But the idea of going into the city, into a downtown, and putting all of that kind of investment and scale, at the time there were a lot of people that felt that was pretty risky. And so that's where I started working on primarily multifamily buildings and a hotel. But almost every building I worked on had ground floor retail in it. So I learned very early on the complexities and nuances of ground floor retail. And anyway, I'm getting sidetracked from the question, but I think just suffice to say that I've always known in my heart that doing these urban revitalizations was something I was just very passionate. I always wanted to do, regardless of where it was or who it was for. And so I went from Washington to Tampa. My first go around in Washington, I went to Tampa. I was lucky enough to head up the development of Water Street Tampa. I was there for a few years, and then I was recruited to go back to the company that I was with, JBG Smith. They had become a publicly traded company. They were a private equity-based real estate company, and they became a publicly traded REIT, real estate investment trust, and they had just been awarded the Amazon HQ too. So I had another fantastic opportunity to go back, and that project was just as ambitious, and both projects have elements that are still open or are now going on to future phases, and so it's pretty exciting to go back to both of those places and see how well they're doing. When I was in DC, I had we all had the misfortune of COVID, and that really changed things in DC. DC in particular was hit pretty hard because of COVID. It has a lot of government leased office space, and the company that I had worked for at the time had, through going public, had actually acquired a lot of Class B and Class C office space, and the development pipeline that we had started to cement had actually, the plan was really to use a lot of the cash flow from those office buildings to help pay for the development by raising money on the public markets. And once you start to see office buildings cash flow start to dry up, or at least the prospect of it, that has implications for the stock price and so on and so forth. So I got connected to Alex Safakis at JWB in 2021. It's actually, I was just thinking the other day, it's been almost 4 years since I first talked with him. And I didn't, candidly, even though I had spent time in Tampa, I didn't really know anything about Jacksonville. I had driven through, I think on I-95, I had seen the skyline. And even I remember
like everybody else,
yeah,
who comes from the Northeast.
I do remember thinking when I drove by, like, that's a pretty impressive skyline. It's a pretty decent for a city I had really never visited. I thought that's pretty great. So I did remember the skyline, but Alex is, for those of you that know Alex, he's very persuasive, and he got me to visit. And honestly, it was after that visit I just felt like this city was on the cusp of something special. Its downtown especially was on the cusp of something special. You have all of the metro area economic and demographic tailwinds that are going for it. Great job growth, good educational system, good median incomes, some incomes that rival Tampa and Orlando for that matter. And although it's rising, still relatively speaking compared to other Florida cities, it's still relatively affordable. And so that, for me, and from having seen what happened in Tampa, that just seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime. It's like, okay, if I could rewind, 10 years ago in Tampa, wouldn't I take that project all over again? And knowing what I know now, especially, and I said, yeah, and I thought, well, I can do that. But in many ways, I think Jacksonville is primed for even more greatness in its downtown area. And I don't say that lightly. I love Tampa a lot, very near and dear to my heart. But I do think that Jacksonville has a lot of attributes that Tampa doesn't, including its proximity to the coast. I think it's a really big deal. Tampa's a little bit further away. From a lifestyle standpoint, that means a lot. It's on the I-95 corridor. It's on the East Coast.
And the I-10 corridor.
I-10 corridor. You got it. It's an hour and a half flight to DC. It's every major city on the East Coast. You have to add 30 minutes on a plane to get down. So anyway, long story short, I just saw this opportunity, and Alex finally convinced me to do it. And so 3 years ago, as of Monday, we started Gateway Jax together.
In Tampa, Bryan, you worked with two progressive mayors. You worked with Mayor Bob Buckhorn, and you worked with Mayor Castor, Jane Castor. here you're working with Mayor Donna Deegan. How would you compare the relationships and the political environment and working with within these two cities?
First of all three of those mayors are fantastic. Mayor Buckhorn and his staff were, wanted to make sure that things were done right, but definitely facilitated the ability for us to do Water Street Tampa and worked with us and worked with our ownership to make that happen. And Mayor Buckhorn, former Mayor Buckhorn has, he's known for having really big, grand ideas and going out there and executing on them. And so he, and Mayor Castor has been fantastic for Tampa, and Tampa's just continued its rising trajectory. When I moved here, let me say it differently. When I first came to Jacksonville, and then for the first few months of Gateway Jax, former Mayor Lenny Curry was actually the mayor, and I had a fantastic experience with him when I was considering coming to Jacksonville. Actually, I remember I went into the mayor's office at City Hall, and and he came up to me and said, "I want you to know you're going to be welcome in Jacksonville. We are excited to have you in Jacksonville, and we're going to do what it takes to make sure that that we can help you all out and get downtown continue its trajectory upwards." And so that's where it started. And I thought, and then I met Lori Boyer, former CEO of the DIA, also absolutely wonderful. Can't say enough great things about her. I started meeting all these people that were involved in either government, Mike, to your question, either in directly with the government, the administration, or ties to it, and city council members. And it's very rare, I think, that you and then I should say Mayor Deegan was elected, and she's just been a tremendous champion for downtown, as has almost all of city council. And it's very rare that you see people rowing in the same direction, especially in today's political environment. It's very rare that you start to see consensus among political parties and different divisions of government that are all kind of working to do the same thing. And we have that downtown. And it does remind me a lot of where we were in Tampa 10 years ago, and that there is a big political there's political support to get things done, and we've got to take advantage of that right now.
Yeah, I think that. I want to go back to Gateway Jax. You've talked about it. 25 square blocks of downtown, $2 billion. I want to get to the $2 billion. You have planned. It's going to be 30 acres when it's finished. 30 acres. That includes 5,000 multifamily units and over a half a million square feet of retail and office space. Pearl Square is the flagship of this development. Tell us about Pearl Square and what's inside those 30 acres, if you can kind of describe that to the listener.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually 32 acres now. It's slightly more these days. But so Pearl Square is our first project. And when I say project, I should say it's really the first neighborhood that we're building in downtown. Now, you can get from the two furthest pieces of property that we own in 10 minutes by walking. So I mean, this is all in a pretty tight area. So when I say a neighborhood or area of downtown, I mean they're not very far apart. What we do in Pearl Square is going to positively impact, we think, other real estate that we own, as well as other neighborhoods in downtown. But yes, Pearl Square is our first large-scale development. It is up to 10 blocks now, and that will have over 1,250 multifamily units, probably well over that. Within those 10 blocks, we still have a couple of parcels that we're working on programming and figuring out exactly what we're going to do there. But we'll have a boutique hotel. We're partnering with a group called Indigo Road out of Charleston, and and a guy named Steve Palmer who owns Oku Restaurant in Jax Beach. And he owns and manages a number of hotels and restaurants all throughout the Southeast. So they're coming on board to manage the boutique hotel, 110 keys. And then we've got 200,000 square feet of retail. And that is going to be made up of a grocery store, about 15 different shopping type of soft goods retailers. So that's everything from clothing to furniture stores, and then about 15 restaurants. And that's everything from a coffee shop to, a white tablecloth restaurant. And that's all going to be within 4 blocks, essentially, from one end to the other. So this is going to really feel like a really walkable, dense neighborhood.
Where is the development at this point in the stage of the process? And when do you see finish?
On the east side, I'll go from east to west. So on the east side, Laura Street is the border for this first phase.
Right.
Laura Street obviously runs all the way down to Riverfront Plaza, former landing site, and that's where our grocery is going to be located, on Laura and Beaver Street. Oh. And so that will anchor that side of the development. And alongside of that, we're going to build 250 apartments. Hopefully within the next, I would say, week or two, maybe we'll be able to unveil all the renderings for that and announce the grocery store.
Good.
Wow.
So that's on the east side of the site. On the west side, it's the far west boundary is Clay Street. But if you go 1 block just to the east of Clay, it's Pearl. And Pearl Street, for those of you that know, it's a historic street. Is actually called Pine, I think, originally, and then was renamed to Pearl. And it goes all the way up through Springfield and further north, and then it dead ends into the St. John's near the Symphony, or the Performing Arts Center. So it's a great street, and when we started acquiring sites in that area of downtown, we ended up getting a handful of sites all next to each other, and I immediately called up, my old the band, called up the band, or whatever that saying is, when you've worked with them before and you trust them. And so I called up a lot of the same people that I had worked with before and said, hey, we've got a lot of real estate here. What would you all do with it? And everyone sort of just coalesced around Pearl Street and said, this really wants to be it. It's close to the City Hall. It's close to the urban core. You've got a ton of historic, really beautiful bones and old buildings in that area, great infrastructure, and that's something we can work with. So that's really where we've been focused. So we're under construction. We started construction in October of last year on our first building.
So you've turned shovels.
We have turned shovels.
There you go.
And by the way, just as an aside, that is such a monumentous feeling and just achievement. Really, it's you just want to pop some champagne when that first shovel goes into the ground, because it's not only just a great feeling, but we've got 20 employees now at Gateway Jax. Will probably be growing over the next several years, but they are hard workers. They are fantastic, and by the way, a much larger group of consultants that have helped us get to this point, consultants and contractors, and it is so refreshing to see a project start, because you live in these world of renderings and numbers, and to go see like a piece of brick or or a hammer, or just something as dumb as that, I guess. It really makes you feel great. So we got started in October with our first project. We started our second project in May, and we'll be starting our third project next month in September. Then another one the month after that in October, and then likely our 22-story high-rise by the very end of the year. And then next year we'll have another 3 projects, including that hotel that I mentioned, start construction. So it's even if you go up there today, it looks like a totally different area. One of our the first project that we started is already topped out. It's at 7 stories, and the other project that we are building is about a block away from that. And that building will be 7 stories as well. It'll have 275 units, and that's now just coming out of the ground. So it's pretty cool.
Unbelievable.
Tampa received a lot of praise. A lot of people couldn't wait for it to happen. But there were critics who also came about, and some of the critics had commented about the expense of living in those areas that you had developed because they needed more affordable housing in order to be service employees for many of those restaurants, hotels, and other things that you developed. How do we get past that? How do you get over that? And are we going to have the same issue here in Jacksonville where people are going to love it, but the employers are going to say, where am I going to live?
I think it's a great question. I've always been, and I think a majority of economists would agree with this, that housing costs are generally tied to supply and demand.
Sure.
And that's the case with a lot of goods, but in housing, it's especially true. And the more housing we can build and the easier and the better we make it for people to build housing, the more that we can keep housing costs under check. I mean, the last time I looked, the United States is somewhere between 7 and 9 million housing units undersupplied. Mm. And that has, and by the way, because of, in part because of interest rates and the capital markets, it's getting harder to build more units. So that gap is only growing right now, which is just going to put, from a national standpoint, more strain on housing costs, unfortunately, in my opinion. So there were a number of things that were happening in Tampa, including COVID, and a very large amount of people moving into Tampa during that period of time. And frankly, there wasn't enough supply to keep up with it. And so you did see rents in Jacksonville go up during COVID. I think everyone's well aware of that. For sale prices and rents on the multifamily side. But in Tampa, they went up even more. And a lot of that was just there were a lot more people moving there and not enough supply. And, in Jacksonville, we just have to be ready. I do think that Jacksonville will become much, I should say maybe not much, but will become more appealing to those people that are looking for places in Florida that are from out of state. The better the downtown, I think anyway, the more you're going to attract those people that are used to urban areas in other major cities. So I think what we need to try to do is continue to make it easier for people to build. And Jacksonville does a great job of that, by the way.
The question I have is, when you were doing Tampa, let's just say that your price point was $110 a square foot.
Yep.
And you said, okay, that could be a livable, affordable place for people to live in 1 or 2 bedroom apartments, let's say. But when you got done, was it still at that price point, or did you find because of external forces that was no longer $110 a square foot, but now is up to $150 a square foot?
There's no question that on the revenue side of things, there were large increases. There's more so than we had underwritten. But if you recall, during that period of time, there were also large increases in costs.
Yeah.
So it ended up, I think, from an economic standpoint, that project ended up being about did as well as we'd hoped it would. But because costs essentially rose alongside of rents, it wasn't necessarily a grand slam, the way that some people might see it today, assuming when they see the rents. Okay. Yeah.
COVID, though, just to go back, though, COVID changed the whole world.
Oh, yeah.
It did.
I mean, not only we see
what
that
a pandemic does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what a pandemic.
No one saw. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, we never dealt with something like that.
No, we all have these stories, but my husband and I, 2 days, I think, after they shut down the federal government, my husband and I jumped in one of our cars. We were living in D.C. in an apartment at the time, and hopped in one of our cars, and we drove 13 straight hours, and stopped at a couple of rest stops and didn't touch anything because you didn't know or whatever at the time. But 13 straight hours down to Tampa. And I'm pretty sure that's actually when I saw the Jacksonville skyline.
Mr. Tolbert, you got another question there, I know.
Bryan, recently the city council approved a land swap with Gateway that gave Gateway Jax 1 acre of prime real estate land at Riverfront Plaza. And in exchange for that, Gateway Jax gave the city a building on Bay Street that it was then going to give to the University of Florida for its graduate school. In my mind, that seems like a win-win-win for everybody. I'm curious as to who had that idea, and from your perspective, why was it such a good deal for the city to do the swap?
We had gone under contract on Interline Brands became or I think grew out of HD Supply, which is a Home Depot logistics company. Home Depot had owned that, and essentially Home Depot wanted to consolidate, or Interline wanted to consolidate their offices because they had, I think, 3 different offices within Jacksonville. And so they decided to leave, but they didn't want people to know that they didn't want to make a big deal of the fact that they were leaving downtown. And so they had approached us, and I don't know if they had approached others, but they had approached us and asked if we wanted to buy it. And by the way, because it was an off-market deal and they wanted it to be, a relatively sure thing. And by the way, you couldn't close on it for about a year. So there are a lot of things that were, that made it kind of complicated. So we ended up buying it, or putting it under contract, I would say. And the other thing is we knew that UF might locate near there. So that was, but we thought even if UF ends up relocating near the stadium, it's still a really great buy, and downtown is going to be growing, and we thought it would be a good opportunity. So we ended up putting it under contract, and ended up buying it about 8 months later. A few months after that, UF announces they're going to go to La Villa, and and they actually reached out to us. UF reached out to us to start and said, "Hey, would you be interested in leasing your building? It's 40,000 square feet. Seems like a great building." And it is, by the way. That thing's built like a tank, and Interline had just renovated it. So I mean, it's a great building. And we said, "Yeah, absolutely, we'll rent it to you." And they said it's probably just going to be short term until we get our new buildings built. So we said, "Yeah, short term, we'll give you a below market rate to rent it from us." Well, we didn't hear anything for a little while, and then we got a call from the city, and the city said that they wanted to buy it from us, and or they wanted to own it so they could give it to UF, but they didn't want to, they don't have to pay money for it.
Right.
So that was where we came up with the idea of the swap, and the city provided a number of sites that they thought would work, and Riverfront Plaza has been, as an observer or someone new to Jacksonville, having something there, something unique and special, and activating the park is so important. Yes. And so, I candidly, I thought this is a great opportunity. I approached the DIA about that idea after they had come to us about the swap idea, and told them what our ideas were, and they loved it. But they said we got to make sure the numbers work. So we had appraisals done, and it turns out the appraisals checked out. So I'll just leave that whole conversation with one thing really quickly. We're in talks with a 5-star hotel. Probably end up doing 150 or so hotel units on that, and then probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 70 condo units with it.
What drives Bryan Moll? Why do you think you can do something of this magnitude? With all due respect, the 3 Mikes have seen other people come in here with the same drive and have failed. I don't mean that to be negative to them. You've been very generous about the way you're there, but I understand risk.
Yeah.
But tell us about what drives you, and if you do, I want to know the lotto numbers.
I would lotto numbers. That's funny. I would just say you mentioned it. It's not my first rodeo.
Okay.
I started out doing small mixed use projects, and I've learned a lot, and I've grown from there. And like I said, I think this has why I ended up in Jacksonville, why I feel so confident about doing this, and why we've already scored a number of wins.
Yeah.
Is a little bit of luck and a little bit of skill. And I think you have to have both to be successful in real estate development. Got great capital partners. Shout out to JWB Real Estate Capital, DLP Capital. They've been fantastic. And honestly, great political environment, just great overall environment. And that doesn't mean there are detractors out there. There are people that will say, well, I'll see it when I believe it. And, they've gotten a little quieter now that we have 2 buildings under construction. But I'm used to that because I've heard that my entire career with these projects.
All right. Anyhow, that's going to do it for us for this week. And by the way, thank you, first of all, for joining us. But we also want to let you know that we are going to be taking a bit of a break. Mike's on Mike is going to be taking a few weeks off. We're going to get our heads back together again. Now that we've just finished our second year, we obviously are looking ahead to see what we want to do during year 3. We're getting close to the silly season, folks. That's what they call the political season. So we have to take a look at what we want to do with all of that. So in the next 3 weeks, you're going to see the best of Mike Miller, at least, and Mike Tolbert and Mike Hightower. Each of us are picking out one show that we've done in the last 2 years, and we're going to be bringing it back to you as a rerun. So we hope you'll.
So it's not the best of us; it's going to be the best show.
We couldn't find the best of us.
Well, I was going to say there isn't one of that. So let's be clear. I don't want anybody to drop off.
We're hoping for that in year 3.
They don't have to be mutually exclusive.
I guess not. Thank you, Bryan, for being with us. Best of luck in what you're doing, and thank you for coming to Jacksonville.
And thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for us. Again, we'll see you in about 3 weeks. And for all of us, as well as our friends at the Jacksonville History Center, thanks for joining us, and take care, everybody.
Hi, I'm Scott Westerman, and I produce Mike's on Mike, with a special thank you to listeners like you who support the program through your contributions to the Jacksonville History Center. 2 years ago, Dr. Alan Bliss and his team generously agreed to aggregate gifts from listeners like you to help pay for the production and distribution of Mike's on Mike. When you specify Mike's on Mike with your donation to the History Center, your support makes these programs possible. And you're engaging in a relationship with the premier organization that celebrates the rich history of our hometown. If you enjoy these weekly conversations, consider a contribution to the Jacksonville History Center at jaxhistory.org. Say it's for Mike's on Mike. And if you're already a Mike's on Mike supporter, thank you.
Mike's on Mike with Mike Tolbert, Mike Hightower, and Mike Miller can be found on your favorite podcasting platform, Facebook, and YouTube. Visit the website at mikesonmike.com. Join us next time for more conversation with Mike's on Mike.